They said she was just a civilian guest, tagging along for the photo ops, a quiet face in a crowd of uniforms that glittered under the harsh lights of the state armory. That's what the sergeant at the check-in table muttered to another as she stepped inside, her hands tucked into the pockets of a plain black jacket, her eyes scanning the banners on the wall. She didn't correct him. She never did. She simply kept walking, past the rows of folding chairs, past the display tables lined with medals and faded photographs, past the people shaking hands over old stories, because she knew this wasn't her place anymore. Not officially, not on paper, not in the kind of history that gets printed on glossy programs. But some histories live outside the margins. If you agree that real heroes don't always wear their stories on their chests, but carry them quietly in their bones, like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear is not in any speech you'll hear today. She found an empty chair in the back corner, far from the podium, far from the spotlight, and sat with her back straight, her face unreadable. She was in her late 20s, but her stillness made her seem older somehow, as if she'd been carrying the weight of a lifetime for years. The name tag clipped to her jacket said nothing more than L. Cross. No rank, no unit, just a name that meant nothing to anyone in the room, except for one man who caught sight of her across the crowd and froze mid-step. But no one else noticed him yet. They were too busy listening to the booming voice of the MC at the podium, introducing the day's honored guests, colonels, sergeant majors, decorated veterans whose service records were public, visible, safe to applaud. No one mentioned the operation that never officially happened in a valley far from here, where a squad of U.S. soldiers found themselves trapped behind a crumbling wall under a sun that burned like a cruel joke, their radios hissing static, their ammo nearly gone, and an enemy drone circling above like a vulture. No one mentioned that the reason those men made it home wasn't because of air support, or artillery, or luck, but because of the woman now sitting quietly in the back row, tapping her fingers once against her knee as if to ground herself. The day it happened, she'd been running comms, her headset crackling with chaos, watching her squad's GPS icons on a battered tablet as they flickered red, one by one, until only 5 remained. She had seconds to act. The drone overhead wasn't friendly. It was enemy reconnaissance, marking their position for a kill strike. She had no weapon that could touch it, but she had something else. A captured enemy tablet, its cracked screen glowing faintly in the dust, and a cable she'd salvaged from a burned-out vehicle days earlier. While gunfire split the air, she knelt in the dirt and connected the tablet to her comms pack, her fingers moving fast, her mind running through half-forgotten code sequences like prayers. The first time she tried, the screen locked. The second time, it opened, and she was inside. She saw what the drone saw. She saw her squad pinned, their last cover crumbling. She reprogrammed its payload, reversing its targeting system. And then she did something no one back home would believe if she tried to explain it. She dropped smoke, not where the drone's operators wanted, but directly between her squad and the kill zone, blinding the enemy's line of sight. In that rolling wall of white, her squad moved, first crawling, then sprinting, their boots pounding against rock until they broke contact. No casualties, no funerals, no folded flags. And when they finally made it back to the outpost, filthy, shaking, alive, they didn't talk about it. They couldn't. The op was classified, and her name wouldn't appear in the record. Not in the official one, but in the unofficial one, the kind soldiers keep in their heads. Her name became a checkpoint of its own. Back in the armory now, none of that showed. She sat there like she'd wandered in off the street, her gaze fixed on the flag at the front of the room. A junior officer near the buffet table was telling a loud story about real combat and how drones were just tech toys, like Xbox with wings. The people around him laughed. She didn't look over. She just reached into her jacket pocket and touched the cool edge of a coin, a challenge coin, that had never been presented in a ceremony, only pressed into her hand by the squad leader whose life she'd saved. Across the room, the man who'd frozen earlier, a captain with lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there a few years ago, was still watching her, the corner of his mouth tightening as if holding back words. He knew. He had been there. He remembered the smoke rolling down that valley like a curtain, the way his boots pounded against the dirt, the way he'd turned his head once and seen her, face streaked with dust, eyes locked on the tablet. holding the whole damn squad in her hands. But no one else in the room did. Not yet. They would, soon enough. But for now she just sat quietly, letting the speeches wash over her, her fingertips resting against the coin, her mind far away, not in the valley, not in the noise, but in the silence right after the smoke dropped, when the only sound was the wind, and the knowledge that every single one of them would get to hear it again. The captain didn't approach her right away. Men like him knew timing, knew when to let a room talk itself into a corner before cutting through it. So he watched, letting the junior officer keep spinning his story about real deployments and actual firefights, the laughter getting louder, sloppier, more comfortable in its ignorance. She stayed still, the coin rolling once between her fingers before she tucked it away, but inside, the valley was back, burn earth under her knees, calm screaming, that static-filled drone feed flickering in her eyes. The heat had been blinding that day, the kind that dries sweat before it forms, the kind that makes air itself feel like a weapon. They'd been on patrol when the first crack of enemy fire split the silence, too far from base to call in a medevac, too close to cover to retreat without being shredded. Her squad leader had taken a round in the shoulder within the first 30 seconds, and 2 more went down scrambling for a broken wall. The enemy's accuracy was too sharp to be random. Someone had eyes on them. That's when she heard the high, fin buzz overhead, looked up, and saw the black shape against the sun. Not ours. And in that instant she knew the valley had become a cage. She'd been a signals specialist for long enough to understand what was coming. Drones don't linger without a reason, and if it stayed overhead, it was either marking them for artillery or feeding live coordinates to enemy forces closing in. Either way, they had minutes at best. She could have stayed in cover, could have tried to call in their own drone, but the airways were scrambled, every request bouncing back dead. Instead, she went for the bag of captured tech they'd hauled from an abandoned insurgent position 2 days earlier, rummaging through until her hands closed around the cracked tablet. The screen lit up just enough for her to see the enemy's interface. Foreign, jagged, but functional. She jammed a cable into her comms pack, the connector wobbling in its port like a bad tooth, and prayed it would hold. The tablet asked for credentials in a language she barely read. She bypassed them by forcing a brute link through the comms relay, her fingers dancing faster than her breath could keep up. Gunfire slammed into the wall above her head, chunks of rock biting into her cheek, but she didn't flinch. Every second counted, and she could feel them sliding away like water through a fist. When the feed came online, it was like dropping into another body, her squad now tiny moving shapes on a glowing grid. Enemy positions lit up in red heat signatures, the drone's targeting software primed for a strike. She didn't disable it. She couldn't, but she could redirect it. Her mind snapped through possibilities, every keystroke a gamble, until her thumb hovered over the payload release icon. She punched in new coordinates, 30 meters off target, straight onto the open ground between the squad and their attackers, and hit deploy. Above them, the drone coughed out a canister, then another, and within seconds the valley bloomed with thick white smoke, a rolling fog that swallowed friend and foe alike. She shouted into comms for the squad to move, now, 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 and they obeyed without hesitation, stumbling at first, then sprinting, boots pounding through dust, one man dragging another by his vest, the air thick with the metallic tang of spent rounds. She stayed crouched, eyes fixed on the feed, steering the drone's slow arc to keep the smoke wall intact until the last of them had crossed the ridge line. Only then did she pull the plug, sling the pack over her shoulder, and run like hell. By the time they regrouped at the outpost, her hands were shaking too hard to drink water. But every head in that squad turned toward her with the same unspoken acknowledgement. We're alive because of you. And then, just as quickly, it was over. The mission classified. The footage buried. The report reduced to squad broke contact, 0 casualties. No mention of the drone. No mention of her. That's the way some wars work. Quiet saviors, loud silences. Now, back in the armory, the captain finally started walking toward her. Conversations faltered in his wake, because something about his gait carried the weight of intent, and even those who didn't know him knew enough to get out of his way. The junior officer, still mid-joke, noticed the shift too late. The captain stopped at her chair, and for the first time that afternoon, she looked up. Recognition flickered between them. Quick, clean, like the click of a chambered round. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. He just said, in a voice meant for everyone in earshot, "Ma'am, I never had the chance to thank you for saving my life." The room went still, the air pulling taut as heads turned. She said nothing, only inclined her head slightly, but the captain kept going. "You remember the valley?" he asked. A few people frowned, confused. He didn't wait for her answer. "We were pinned down, outgunned, marked for death. And he pointed, slow and deliberate, hijacked the enemy's own drone, blinded them with smoke, and walked us out of there without losing a single soul." A ripple moved through the crowd. First disbelief, then realization, as the weight of his words settled. The junior officer's mouth opened, then closed. Someone near the front muttered, "Wait, that was her?" The captain nodded once, still looking at her. That was her. She didn't move, didn't bask in it, just let the silence work. And in that silence, the line between the ones who knew and the ones who didn't began to shift forever. For a moment, no one breathed. The hum of the armory's lights seemed louder than the people in it. Every flicker of the fluorescent tubes bouncing off rows of medals, flags, and now 100 pairs of eyes fixed on the woman in the black jacket. She didn't stand, didn't shrink, just sat there, hands resting lightly on her knees, as if the captain's words hadn't just cracked the room open. It was the master of ceremonies who broke first, clearing his throat into the microphone and asking, half out of curiosity and half out of obligation, "Is that true?" The captain didn't look away from her when he answered. Every word. Murmurs swept the rows, rippling toward the front where a cluster of senior officers stood, their expressions sharpening. One of them, a colonel with silver bars glinting under the overhead lights, stepped forward slowly, like a man approaching a live wire. "Name?" he asked, voice even. She met his gaze and said simply, "Lena Cross." The name landed like a dropped shell casing, small, metallic, and louder than it should have been. The colonel's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Cross. Valley Ridge?" he said under his breath, but in the silence, everyone heard it. She gave the barest nod. That was all it took. The colonel turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying with the precision of a man who'd spent decades giving orders. "You are sitting in the same room as the woman who turned an enemy drone into the very thing that saved a U.S. squad from certain death. A classified Op-Zero casualties. And without her, I wouldn't be here to tell you about it." Gasps broke through the murmurs. The junior officer who'd mocked drones earlier looked like the floor had been yanked from under him, his bravado collapsing into a hollow stare. One by one, people rose from their seats, not in a scramble, not like they'd been told to, but in that slow, deliberate way reserved for things that matter. By the time the colonel turned back to her, the entire room was standing. "Ms. Cross," he said, his voice softening without losing its steel, "on behalf of those who came home because of you, and the families who never had to hear the knock at the door, thank you." He saluted, crisp and unwavering. And then something happened that she hadn't prepared for, not in the valley, not in the years since. The room followed. Veterans with decades of service, rookies fresh from basic, family members, even the caterers at the back, they all raised their hands in unison, a forest of salutes aimed at the quiet woman in the corner. She didn't move at first, because this wasn't why she'd come. She hadn't expected this. She'd only wanted to sit in the back, watch from a distance, and leave before anyone asked questions. But now every eye in the room was on her, and in them, she didn't see curiosity or pity. She saw understanding. Slowly, she rose. Her boots made no sound on the armory's old wooden floor as she stepped forward, weaving through the rows until she stood at the front beside the colonel. "I didn't save anyone for recognition," she said, her voice steady but quiet, carrying in the hush. "I did it because they were mine. And when it's your people, you don't think about the rules or the headlines or who gets the credit. You just get them home." She paused, scanning the faces in front of her. "We all know someone who did the same, and no one ever heard about it. So if you take anything from me being here, it's this: remember them, even if the world forgets." She stepped back, but the colonel stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. From his pocket, he produced a small box, the kind that carries weight beyond its size. He opened it to reveal a medal most in the room had only ever seen in books, the Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. Gasps rolled through the hall. This was approved years ago, the colonel said. But the mission's classification kept it in a drawer. It's yours now. He pinned it to her jacket, his hands steady, his voice low enough for only her to hear. You earned this the moment you dropped that smoke. She didn't look down at it. She just met his eyes and gave a single nod. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was deep, steady, the kind that comes from the chest. Even the junior officer clapped, his head bowed, a lesson carved into him without a word. When the crowd finally began to break, people came in ones and twos, some to shake her hand, some just to say thank you, some to stand near her for a moment, as if proximity might teach them something. She accepted it all quietly, the metal gleaming faintly against the black of her jacket, the challenge coin still in her pocket. Later, as the armory emptied and the folding chairs scraped back into stacks, she stood alone for a moment beneath the flags. The captain approached, that same tight smile on his face. It's good they know now, he said. She shrugged lightly. They don't need to. Maybe not, he agreed. But they should. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just stepped past him toward the doors, the cool night air spilling in as she pushed them open. Outside, the street was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm. She walked into it without looking back, her silhouette swallowed by the darkness. And somewhere in the room she'd left behind, the colonel's voice carried over the last few lingering conversations. Remember her name. Lena Cross. Remember it when someone tells you drones are just toys. Remember it when someone says one person can't change a battle. And remember it the next time you wonder if anyone would have your back. Inside, the lights dimmed, but the story would stay lit. In the minds of everyone who had been there, in the families of the men she'd saved, and in the unspoken oath that passed from one soldier to another. No matter the odds, you don't leave your people behind.